EfilDay video. 14? Somewhere in there. Anyway, yeah, there's a couple of subjects, but I'll stick to one for this video and then make another video. But anyway, I had, a conversation, a couple hours in, whatever, Hate Club, whatever the hell it's called. Anyway, on Skype, and, Skeptical Heretic, Edible Napalm, other people, whatever, conversation, and two dominant subjects, and they're sort of related, but not really. But there's the idea of this imposition argument, so I guess I'll do that one now. And then there's this argument about the existence of value as a reality, as some part of the reality that we are describing philosophically or intelligently attempting to describe. What's the maze, what's the game we're playing, and what's the value components of the game we're playing. And I'm basically arguing that there's one truth to the reality in terms of the function of the game, the value of the game, and we either get a right answer or a wrong answer, but there's not multiple answers. The fact that, back to this argument, the fact that pie is food is a fact. What kind of pie you personally like is factual, but it's not relevant. It's not an intrinsic value of the pie. That kind of value. The fact that it's desirable to you does not mean it has intrinsic value, but it does have intrinsic value as food, as potential nourishment. And I'm sort of arguing that the state of our consciousness, well, maybe I'll do this subject now since I'm in there. The state of our consciousness creates value. Every second of our lives, our consciousness is in a state. We are comfortable or uncomfortable. We're on some linear line of comfort, either low or high in terms of good or bad relative positions. And to be as being in that state, we radiate, in a sense. We create a gravity weight, value weight. We create, you can metaphor it in different ways. I mean, that is, in a sense, we do actually radiate it, a capturable amount of this substance called a welfare or a condition. And that's one of the properties of being conscious, that when you're unconscious, your welfare is not relevant or meaningful or substantial. You're not generating any value at that moment. And when you are conscious and you are feeling, you are generating either a positive or negative weight to the value pool. You're putting water in or you're taking water out of the net value ether of the universe. These are metaphors, but the only way you can talk about this is metaphorically, because obviously value isn't a material thing. It's a conceptual description of relationship, of properties that something has that aren't visible properties. They are invisible, non-material, but they are fundamentally, in my opinion, discernible and definable. There's a certain and definite difference between consciousness and unconsciousness, and the difference is significant. Okay, it's not irrelevant, it's not meaningless, it's not like the light side and dark side of the moon or something. And no, it's a meaningful difference. It's all the difference that matters in all of the universe. The welfare of a consciousness, a feeling thing, a thing that can be in a negative state, and negative in all of what that word implies. Negative in bad, negative in deficit, void. Then you can use all the other more descriptive words, rotten, nasty, cruddy, wasteful, stupid, whatever. It's decidedly it's decidedly negative, decidedly less positive, decidedly different than a neutral or positive state. Now, the positive state is the trickier one, because I would argue that most positive states are merely the acquisition or the correction of a type of negative state. A deprivation creates a hunger, and then the hunger creates the opportunity for satisfaction. So it's essentially a sinking in to the quicksand, to the noise, to the nastiness, and as you pull out of the noise and the nastiness, the suffocation, there is the comfort and joy of the fresh air, the ability to go back to the state that you might have thought wasn't even that good a state, but it now is a spectacular state because it isn't negative anymore. And desire sort of works in that mechanism. It pushes and pulls you with, by relieving in little jerks and manipulations inside our psychology, I would argue, of a kind of pulling the needle in and out of the eye in a way, some kind of, it creates the opportunity for the positive, and it does it in a way where it sneaks the negative into us and then pulls the gratification out of us. So it's kind of like kind of a gross example, but maybe the formation of a blemish, a pimple. It grows on you slowly. The pain might even come on you gradually, but once it's there, there's this opportunity for relief. There's this opportunity to gain comfort. And so I'm kind of arguing that our psychology works in lots of different ways, but one of the mechanisms that plays with us is that the tensions and the pains are built into us gradually and slowly, so we don't see ourselves being put into the negative condition, dragged into the quicksand. But we can realize this huge potential release of that tension and frustration. So I might argue that something like an orgasm is merely a reflection of just how you're being relieved of all the little tensions that already exist inside of you. So I've made this argument before, but I mean, if you do, just take yourself even in a neutral state and analyze your psychology, analyze your state of being, you can find miseries, you can find discomforts, some maybe a little arthritis in the knuckle, maybe a little twinge in the back, a little bit of a pulled muscle over here, a little something, there's little nags and cruds, and even the weight of gravity. Sometimes you can feel it on you as a tension and as a leadifying, a confining, a compression of yourself, and you can almost feel the potential to be relieved, and that's what I would argue that these pleasure sensations are built out of. Is it's merely the body collecting a bunch of subtle negative states and then providing you a taste of what it feels like to be relieved of those. And those would be what we call pleasure. So even the gratification in eating is creating a kind of physical bodily neutrality from which we're deriving the pleasure that we're gaining. Basically the game is just to elevate you or take you out of the physical confinement, and that's why most entertainments are called escapism, because in a sense that's part of the mechanism of the pleasure, is escaping yourself, escaping the physical body and becoming liberated to fantasize or live in some other dimensional world. In terms of your thoughts are no longer contained in this, and they are extended into something else, some other medium, like a screen or whatever, a movie screen or some other mechanism. All right, well, anyway, I didn't want to get too lost in that. So anyway, in the conversation I had, I think I did okay in trying to make this argument and coming up with metaphors and ways of describing the substance. But a key argument is this idea that there are people who would argue that there is somehow a possibility that value isn't set and intrinsic, that it is up to some sort of subjective interpretation, and that somehow there is some subjective way to define it. And I find that I find it logically impossible to go with that model, because eventually that model will just lead to some idea that the Holocaust didn't matter, or that suffering doesn't matter, and that you could double the amount of it, or triple it, or quadruple it, or times it times the speed of light squared, and somehow you hadn't done a negative thing. When I think the intrinsic, fundamental negative character of being in a negative state of consciousness, no matter what you call that, I mean, I might call this neutral state boring and dull and tedious. Obviously, to somebody who's been stranded in the desert for a week without water or comfort, this state of consciousness is bliss, because his state is so negative. But that's the only reason why it is because his state is negative. It doesn't mean that he is subjectively allowed now to say this is a good state, or this has some sort of intrinsic value of great positive value. It just means that he personally is in a negative state, and relative to his state, this is a positive state. But not that this has any absolute positive value. So I guess I would still argue that that the whole feeling mechanism is a zero-sum mechanism, and that it can be parallel to the desire mechanism, which is a zero-sum mechanism, where there is nothing wrong until your brain makes something wrong. There is nothing to chase until your brain creates the chaseable, the hunger. The hunger doesn't exist in the food. The hunger exists in our perception. And so the value does not exist in terms of the desirability of having it in it, where intrinsically the value exists in the state of this consciousness, in terms of it being clearly definable, describably, in a negative or in a more negative or less negative state. We can do the relative thing. Even if we can't define where it converts from positive to negative, we can definitely and absolutely say that this state is better than that state when we compare just two states of being. And I guess I would argue that if we could taste true neutrality, true escape from desire, tension, want, all these projections of I need, that state would be rather blissful, that it might be even orgasmic, and that's truly the true neutral. We're just in this diluted state because we are so deep in the hole, and we are climbing. We have the sense of gravity is telling us that we are moving upward, we are improving our state, but we have no conception of the fact that we're not really going up. We're just getting out of a negative hole. So we're still below the neutral zero, and it's just an illusion of progress because we're getting out of a hole our psychology creates. So again, we're sort of back to the argument of the need that doesn't need to be created, the unneeded need, replication for the sake of replication. These are all the mechanisms that are basically they are self-justifying. They contrive the defense for themselves. So our function is basically to fix the lesser condition and improve it to a better condition, that's the basic desire mechanism, the function of the being a value creator, being a value, caught up in the value mechanism. That's the intuitive structure, is going to be focused on that simple idea that if I can improve my state of being, I will do so, because it is necessarily logical. It's just by intrinsic and fundamental truth that it's better to feel better. So again, it's better for the sake of better, but it's just unescapable logic to improve the condition, not degrade the condition. It's better to make it more efficient than less efficient. It's better to make it productive instead of destructive would not be the right word, but excessively consumptive, inefficient. So that's the nature of the nature. So there isn't anything here for us to do. So we're back sort of again now to another metaphor, my janitor metaphor, that what life basically puts you in a position of is that the best you can do, if you're going to optimize your existence, is to be a really good janitor, to fix a lot of broken things and messed up things and sloppy things. So if you can make other people happy, that's good. If you can make it so it's easier for them to do something, that's good. If you can facilitate or lubricate the world in the sense that you have now made it easier for things to elevate their condition, including yourself. Yourself is a consciousness of importance, but obviously you're not the only consciousness, and in most cases we can do more to fix other people's problems because their problems are easier to fix than we can to fix our own when you exist in one of these rich countries. It's fairly easy to elevate the state of somebody in Africa. 50 cents elevates their state of being. $100 makes them deliriously happy. I mean, deliriously happy, where it doesn't going to work on us. So obviously the efficiency, the practicality would be that you can do much more elevation of the state of consciousness by working on these other individuals than trying to work on yourself, just because of the mechanics, just because of the steady state level at which you're at. It becomes harder and harder for you to gain distance from the negative state. As you get closer to the neutral, as you get closer to the surface, because of the mechanics, it becomes harder and harder to make more progress. So it's almost like Einstein's speed of light thing. As you get closer and closer to the speed of light, you become heavier and heavier, and it becomes harder and harder to gain any kind of velocity, that would move you faster. There's not enough energy in the entire universe to move you any faster at some point. And that's kind of the failing of the mechanism. And that we fall into that same trap, is the more you have, the harder it is to make that progress. But again, I want to just emphasize that point, that that's the futility of the mechanism, is that it's carrots and whips, and they're all made up in our perception, and they're all made out of essentially a whip. There isn't really a carrot, there's just absence of whip. So that's the dilemma that we're caught up in, is we think it's a carrot that we're chasing, but what we're really chasing is the relieving or absence of the contrived desire. So it's the relieving of the hunger or relieving of the desire that we are calling the satisfaction. But we're really just taking away the negative to create the positive. And that's all there is in the universe. The only way you can make a positive is to correct a negative. To eliminate a negative is the only true positive. So that's an argument I made before. But I don't want this is going on forever, and I didn't want to do that. But anyway, that was a substantial portion of the conversation was on that subject. And it is a difficult subject because we are talking about something that is invisible. Value. value has no physical structure, but I am claiming it is just as real as the matter in the universe. The value of the welfare of a child is just as real as the moon or the earth or the sun. It's maybe more real in the sense that it is the only thing that has any significant weight, any meaning weight. And so all these things with all this dense material gravity have no meaning weight unless they're somehow implicating something that feels. But other than that, they have no meaning. They have no relevance. They have no meaningful existence. And this invisible thing of a consciousness is the thing where all the real meaning weight in the universe exists. Yeah. That's the argument. And again, I will concede that it's hard to make a proof for it because I can't use science to prove it. I can't use a microscope or a telescope or a scales or something. I have to only use a logical argument to prove the truth of it. Okay, now that's more than enough. It's about the right amount of enough, I think. But anyway, next time.